you do it anyway. So very briefly, it's great to have Sam and Michael Novey here. You know them very well. Sam does a bunch of things. I kept looking for things on his website, like, oh wait, he does that thing too. Oh, he does that thing. Oh, he does that thing too. Oh, so he's the chief strategist at the Center for Democracy and Civic Engagement, University of Maryland. Founded Students Learn, Students Vote, the nation's leading nonpartisan coalition to encourage student voting. A major figure, maybe the co-founder, I forget, of Baltimore Votes, secretary part of the Baltimore City Electoral Commission, very involved and active member of Betham. And in fact, both of these folks they're going to talk about civic institutions and Jewish institutions, and they've done so much for both. And Sam has very cute kids. Michael is attorney at the in legislative tax policy and part of the Treasury. So we thank him for helping keep alive our civic institutions, and has also been very involved as the chair or as a board member of multiple Jewish institutions, including, if I'm not mistaken, Chizik and Betham, and also sire to many talented Noveys. So they're going to talk about their lives and their involvements in Betham, and it's very nice to have them here. So thank you.
I was involved in and still am involved in the lay leadership of Krieger Schechter, but when the Physica Muna moved, which is one of the things we're talking about today, I ended up moving with them and coming back to basically to visit and in particular to enjoy the music, which was still here in many cases. First, can I be heard if I'm talking at this level? Okay, because they promised me that this was not one of those microphones which you have to pretend is an ice cream cone. No, there are any number where if you simply have it this far out, people think, I can't hear you, I can't hear you. Okay. The title of this pair of discussions with me and Sam is There's No Place Like Home. So why does a Jewish community exist in 2025 in Maryland, in Baltimore, at 2501 Utah Place? Changes in the surrounding society, separations of Jewish communities have not ended the dedication to Jewish communal life. The 1649 Toleration Act, toleration that wasn't for us. Maryland was founded in 1634, partly to protect English Catholics. In 1649, the Assembly in Lord Baltimore legislated religious tolerance, but only for Trinitarian Christians. To deny the divinity of Jesus or the tripartite nature of God was a capital crime. There were no out Jews in that era, or at least they didn't live long. In 1826, there was what was generally called the Jew Bill. The Maryland General Assembly changed the state oath for holding public office and holding certain other kinds of positions of responsibility. It would now be sufficient to declare belief in a future state of rewards and punishments, but no longer necessary to declare belief in the Christian religion. It took nearly, nearly a quarter of a century before that became sufficient. It was still controversial, but to at least pass. A congregation of Bavarian immigrants. By 1830, the growing Jewish community had obtained a state charter for a, quote, body corporate, which basically was the legal entity that is now called Baltimore Hebrew. The East Baltimore community consisted largely of peddlers and shopkeepers. Most were Bavarian immigrants. Only a minority of that congregation's funds came from dues or offerings in response to honors such as aliyot, after which it would be customary to give a contribution. The primary income for many years was fines for conduct that didn't rise to the orderly decorum that the community believed was necessary in America. I've read suggestions that people just sort of felt like continuing to treat the synagogue as they had before, and that was a source of economic support for the synagogue because of the fines. There were charges for talking during services, putting away one's talit before services were over, singing louder than Shaliach Tzibur, or for chewing tobacco. For most of those, that might be an idea for how Beth Am could solve any financial problems. In terms of the chewing tobacco, it may be that the fine was not for chewing, but for missing the spittoons that were near every cigarette. In 1840, Baltimore Hebrew hired the first ordained rabbi to come to America. By 1845, there was a classical Greek synagogue building on Wood Street. There were tensions over observance. Rabbi Rice and most of his congregants were from Bavaria. They spoke German, they were Orthodox, but economic pressures caused many congregants to keep their stores open on Shabbat. The rabbi ruled that the congregation should not honor these offenders by calling them to the Torah. Too many honor, how can you honor a Shabbos breaker? Too many members, however, kept their shops open. And also, as a practical matter, the congregation could not afford to give up donations based on somebody having received an aliyah. So if you all were there, could you have found a path through this difficulty that neither disrespected the rabbi nor unduly impoverished the congregation?
Probably not.
They cared equally about both. Things may have shifted slightly. In the end, the rabbi modified his decree. Shabbat breakers could be given aliyah, but when they recited the blessings, the congregation would not reply amen. By 1849, these tensions had led Rabbi Rice to leave. During the next 2 decades, congregational membership was increasingly divided about changes in the service. Disagreements included equally customs that were not halakhically required, but also some issues that some members thought were halakha, and in many cases, people really thought that what they had grown up with was halakha, regardless of whether you could find it in the Shulchan Aruch. By 1870, the congregation at first defeated a motion that would have allowed girls between 11 and 14 to join the choir. A half year later, the motion passed, and then led by Jonas Friedenwald, a group of traditionalists left. Within a decade, Baltimore Hebrew introduced an organ, a new prayer book, wearing of a talit was ended. There was they also entered gender separate seating. Baltimore Hebrew had become reformed. Friedenwald's group founded a new congregation, Chizuk Emunah, Strength of Faith. I have never confirmed my suspicion of why it is that Chizuk Emunah is pronounced with an A at the beginning of Emunah. Jan Schein, who is the Chizuk Emunah archivist, could not find anything that confirmed it. I still retain the suspicion that the German pronunciation of A with an umlaut is E, and that might have been why they chose to spell Chizuk Emunah with an A to begin the second word, strength of faith. The congregation in its constitution barred any alteration or addition to the mode of worship. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. They locked it down. It was not going to change. By the summer of 1876, Kuzukamuna, with only 46 families, had constructed and moved into the Moorish building down the block from the Lloyd Street Synagogue, which is still there. The speaker at that building's dedication was the first American-born rabbi, Henry Schneeberger. He earned a bachelor's and master's degree from Columbia before going to Europe for smicha and a doctorate. Soon after the event where he had delivered this talk at the dedication of the new building, he became Chizkiyamuna's rabbi. What kind of person was he? 9 decades later, Jonas Friedenwald's great-grandson, who happened to be my father's law partner, he remembered Schneeberger, and he said that he was always called Dr. Schneeberger, never Rabbi Schneeberger. His head was always covered when he was in synagogue or at prayer, but never with a yarmulke. Instead, he wore either in prayer or in the synagogue a high silk hat or his silk cap. I sort of have to have this image of him. I assume he was not white tie and tails, but he still had the appropriate hat for being in the synagogue. A congregation school for both boys and girls began immediately. After a year, at the members' desire, religious instruction in German was included along with English and Hebrew. In 1888, Dr. Schneeberger entered the German. By the early 1890s, members were moving from East Baltimore, down where Wood Street is, to what was considered uptown, like Bolton Hill. At a branch of the congregation school opened in 1892 at 714 Madison Avenue. In January 1894, when membership was 44 families, the congregation decided to move. By the fall of 1895, the Lloyd Street building had been sold to B'nai Israel. Chizkiyamunah had moved to a newly constructed synagogue on the corner of McCullough and Mosher Streets. The result, if you sort of think about that geography, it was 4 German synagogues within a few blocks of each other: Orthodox Chizkiyamunah, Reform, Baltimore Hebrew, Ohab Shalom, and Hosanna. The congregation, Chizkiyamunah's congregation school there was in the basement, and teachers and parents considered that inadequate. So by 1919, the congregation decided to build a new at the corner of Utah Place and Chauncey Street. To combat assimilation, the new building would provide space not only for services, but also for educational and social programming. Difficulty of raising funds, however, required scaling back some of the original architectural features. The planned dome had to be canceled. Not there now. The congregation reluctantly had to turn down a vendor's offered price for marble. The non-Jewish owner of the marble company, however, lowered the price. And he said, "Your sanctuary should have only marble. It is an honor for me to build a holy ark for a Jewish house of worship. I will charge you only the same as you would have to pay for a holy ark of wood." And that explains the beauty of the marble upstairs. When the congregation moved to the new building in late 1922, the Jewish Times, which was already there, I question whether it's still here, but it's not. The congregation moved to the new building in late 1922. The Jewish Times called it, quote, "the most elaborate Orthodox synagogue in the United States." The main sanctuary had 1,500 individual seats with state-of-the-art acoustics. Nevertheless, in 1940, responding to a prior request from the sisterhood, loudspeakers were added. Before World War II, the Baltimore Jewish community was expanding toward the Northwest, and many synagogues were founded in those neighborhoods or moved there. Hezekiah therefore was challenged to maintain or increase its membership. To meet the need for classrooms, in 1941, the congregation decided to buy the large house on the corner of Utah and Whitelock Street. But several years passed before it was actually used as a school. Congregational leadership considered several aspects of services as being relevant to maintaining membership. In 1944, Isaac Potts, later president of Chizkamuna, but also the father of the leader of Bethel, presented a paper highlighting three major points about the services that he perceived with good basis would be relevant to maintaining membership. Additional English during the services, shorter services, and family seating. Family seating was the term used for men and women sitting together. In the following years, English was increased. Annual pledges successfully replaced, for example, offerings for each Misha Berach. So during Yizkor, you would sort of interrupt the service by everybody who wanted to remember somebody going up saying a Misha Berach, and that Misha Berach was eventually financial support for the synagogue. So instead, they found that if you ask people for an annual pledge, you also could survive. But mixed seating was a sticking point. Chizkamuna had always supported the United Synagogue and the Jewish Theological Seminary. The congregation's leadership participated actually in having attracted Solomon Schechter to lead a unified JTS. Nevertheless, separate versus mixed seating had become a passionate distinction between Orthodox and conservative. On December 29, 1947, with the halachic approval of both the rabbi of the congregation and of JTS leadership, the members chose mixed seating. Not long after, the Baltimore phone book and a local church director changed the congregation's listing from Orthodox to conservative. Just one interesting digression for which I hope you will forgive me. Hadar's Rabbi Ethan Tucker strongly supports gender equality in Jewish prayer, and he and Michael Rosenberg, who now is also Hadar, have written a book on gender equality in Jewish prayer, which has now been translated and published in Israel. But in a recent podcast discussing Mechitza, he articulated the idea that as long as you maintain gender equality in the prayer service, a Mechitza is sometimes defensible or appropriate.
Something his father would probably disagree.
His father would disagree there. And his stepfather, Alav Shalom, is gone. Novey, the 2501 Utah place. Around 1950, my parents joined Chizkamuna for its excellent schools. Sunday school was in rooms on this level along the north side of the building. These new portable divisions mean I can't point to where the windows over there are. But that was where Sunday school was. Hebrew school was down the block at the corner of Whitelock Street.
Michael, were there multiple classrooms
Yes.
on the north side?
Yeah.
Not just the old library space?
No, there were
Kind of a long,
at least it was a long time ago.
yeah.
But yeah, no, it was classroom size spaces
Yeah.
along that wall. And the just something driving over here, I sort of looked over at the Whitelock Street building, and the tree in front was gone because that was a magnificent climbing tree. You know, the kind of tree where you've got main branches that are within reach of a school age child. Gone. Okay. The school principal once mentioned, I heard him say that Sephardi pronunciation sort of seemed odd to him. Decades later, when he was saying Kaddish for his wife, it was Yid Gadal, Yid Kadash. At my bar mitzvah, Cantor Wisegull, right upstairs here, gave me one of his own throat lozenges. It was a tan disc about the size of a quarter. I popped it into my mouth. It was the strongest, most horrible taste that I had ever experienced. And so there I was, a 13-year-old, believing that everybody was looking only at me. And I had to get that horrible thing out of my mouth. Providential. And if you have that experience, you never have doubt in divine support. There was a large plant right there.
Is that like in those big vases?
The big vases.
So it might still be in there.
Yes.
And you know, I don't think the license killed the plant, but the taste was strong enough that it might have. I later learned that every morning putting on his tefillin, my grandfather prayed to see my bar mitzvah. When my bar mitzvah came, it was the only time in his life that he had been willing to be in a car in Shabbat. As he finished his aliyah, despite his cane, sort of juggling the cane, he managed to kiss and hug me. 2 months later, he died. Second Seders were held in this space, but without the dividers. Every year, Governor McKelvin attended. Although I learned later, he actually was a local. He had a grandiloquent speaking style, which was just like an exotic accent. I could never figure out where he was from, other than he was from here, but he sure didn't sound like it. But each year he got the same assignment. He read Psalm 114 in the Hallel. What ails thee, O sea, that thou didst flee? I'm not going to try to sound like him because no one human being today could. But it was that in the mountains skipping like rams, and they looked like it was a. No one has read 114 that well since. One year for Elijah's cup, Jack Mark entered dressed as Elijah. Came in from back there, and he was with a staff, a white robe, and a chaotic white wig and beard. From the far side of the room, an excited toddler couldn't contain himself. Look, Mommy, it's Santa Claus. At the end of the fall holidays, the choir came down from the choir loft to the Bima for their own hilarious version of Adonai, different every year, different theme each year, but hilarious. A highlight of services for me was everybody singing along with the choir. One example that I still remember and very much miss was that for the second part of Ulatana Tokef, everyone would join in full voice, pardon the fact that I can't sing at all, who will live and who will die, who in his due time and who not in his due time. And there was sort of a back and forth as people sang that. Consistent with the messages of the high holidays, the emphasis was on the vicissitudes of life. Today, if congregations sing along at all, they repetitively affirm predestination during the coming year. If I've just insulted a practice of this congregation, I apologize, but it has never struck me as being the focus of the Ulatana Tokef as much as that list of things that could happen that gives you an appropriate sense of fertility. But that is only the first half of the story. Now the second.
First, thanks, that was great.
But too long.
No, perfect. No, not too long at all. So we actually stopped praying at 2501 Utah Place within a few years of starting. And my grandfather Julius played a significant role in that. He was a real estate lawyer and he volunteered to help both acquire the land out in Pikesville and then manage a lot of the contract associated with building the Stevenson Road campus for Chizik. And Jan Shine, who's an amazing resource, if you guys don't know her, at Chizik, she has found and digitized these newsreels that Chizik has of the, signing the contract with the lawyer, the board vote to move to Pikesville, the groundbreaking ceremony. And so I wanted to share some of those because they have actually changed my perspective. Seeing these videos has changed my perspective on this history quite a bit. So I wanted to share a couple.
Which one with
The
the
architect,
architect?
yeah.
Hopefully you'll be able to hear at home.
Videos are quite interesting and they're kind of like a window back into time into the 1950s in a way that's kind of hard to access now. And I guess they've made me I think both kinder and less reverent towards mid-century conservative Judaism. And there's a couple of things that really sort of stand out to me. One thing is that Isaac Potts at one point in there says, we are building this campus in Pikesville, and it's going to be a spot for Judaism to thrive for 100 years. And we're like now almost 70 years past that, so we're most of the way through his vision. And there are some things to quibble with about what his vision was, and whether embracing suburbia was like the right thing for all of us. But I think it's just cool that he had a 100-year vision and was like going for it.
And the three prior buildings have both lasted between 2 and 3 decades.
Yeah. So we'll get to that in a second.
I'm
But yes, so I think that's like kind of a cool, and I think that's something that we can take with us, that we should all be thinking about how Jews can thrive in Baltimore 100 years from now, and that is something that they were thinking about then, and that's something we can think about now. And even if we don't like everything about what people nearly 100 years ago thought about how we should live, that doesn't mean that it's not awesome that they were trying to make a life for us. And I'm thankful to that, even if I disagree with certain aspects of their 100-year vision. Another thing that really strikes me about these videos is that I hadn't really in my soul integrated how like early people had decided to leave physics. So, we're having the 50th anniversary of Bethon this year, and these videos are nearly 75 years old, right? So they were, keeping, and they basically kept this building going for 20 years after they had decided to move out to Chizik. And that means, huge, folks here know a little bit about maintaining this building. Just keeping it from falling down for 20 years is no small
So
thing.
nothing was happening in here?
No, they were having services every week in here too. So they were,
Oh, wow.
yes, Steve.
My family story about this is that, they said as long as Abba Weisskall, who wouldn't drive on Shabbat, is alive and living in the building next door, we have to have services here on Saturday mornings for Abba Weisskall.
Wow.
And that's why we couldn't get rid of the building.
Where did Chazan Weisfeld live? Was it on Chauncey?
It was my uncle.
I heard he used to play pinball at Manheim, that I remember, which was right over where Lucky's is now, but I don't know where his house.
But I thought he lived in, when I met him, he was living in one of the high rises near here, but I don't know which one.
No, I mean, there's a picture of him with a whole bunch of people around him in his sukkah, which I think was just down the block here.
Yeah, so I think, but there's something kind of nice about that, where they're embracing the reality of where Jews in the 1950s are living, which is like not here, right? But they are not abandoning their past, and in not abandoning the past, they actually enable this future that we've now lived into at Betham. And that was a decision that is very, there's no like sort of successor synagogue to Ohab Shalom or Baltimore Hebrew, or all those other synagogues are not in use. That this is the one that by not abandoning their past, they actually enabled the future. And I think you know, if we look at the founding of Bethel, sort of as not just 50 years ago, but having this like 20-year prehistory. Before that, I think it has some valuable lessons for the present day, and it's something to the credit of the folks who you know, facilitated the move to Pikesville. Another thing is just sort of a crucial function of synagogues is to be where the Jews are. And so you know, we can be critical of Jews moving to suburbia, but if Jews are in suburbia, then the synagogues need to be in suburbia. And you can see, particularly in the video of the groundbreaking here, you can see just how much having a bigger campus sort of enabled Chizuk to go from, you know, a 50 to 100 family synagogue to a much larger sort of campus with multiple schools and a camp and all sorts of stuff that's happening out there, and that, you know, has enabled a lot of Jewish life to thrive for, you know, 70 years. And then to the point my dad was making, you know, these people were clearly not as reverent towards their ancestors and the buildings as we are in a lot of ways, that they, you know, that this building, like, can you imagine if we had built this building in 1995 and we're like, and now we're like gonna get out of here, you know, that is really hard to imagine. They were just really aggressively sort of you know, trying to get ahead of where their community was going, even if that meant in some cases moving on from past decisions. And so I guess in that way, you know, I came in a little bit sort of you know, less than positive on like mid-century conservative Judaism. And I think seeing how the people involved in it actually were acting, and seeing how they you know, seeing them as full people has made me much sort of more sympathetic to them, and able to appreciate them without needing to accept all the decisions they made. So with that, I think we can move to questions.
Yeah, sorry, I
No, it's
tried to download it, but I'm having trouble like actually queuing it up, so I'll see if I can find it.
That's okay. I think we can share them digitally later.
Questions?
Make sure that's okay with Jan.
Yeah, sure.
Here's what I found.
I just have a question about the use of the building. When did they, so I remember services in the chapel down here.
Me too.
Right, until fairly recently. And when did they have services downstairs as opposed to upstairs back in the day?
Shabbos services were always us.
And daily was downstairs?
I think so, but I can't do Shabbos services.
Was it the same chapel that we used to have, Michael, that was over, just over here? The old chapel?
I don't know, there was a boardroom, but I think that may have been upstairs.
Boardroom might have been, was kind of like the library.
That's right,
Had,
yes.
like, yeah, that's what I think was
But
there.
no,
I
I-
heard was like originally maybe the rabbi study, but
Yeah,
then also
comment.
became boardroom.
Oh,
We used to use.
But I mean, there,
yeah.
my memory vaguely is that sort of toward that corner,
It was.
there was, but
Yeah.
yeah, a chapel with actually, it had a Aron Kodesh and some Torahs in it and so forth.
Carla, go ahead.
I remember coming once as a teenager, and I was emailing with Arna to try and pin it down when, with her, to a Shabbat service that was downstairs. There weren't enough people to be upstairs. So this was been in 1969 or 70, soon before the changeover. And we're trying to figure out which year, because I met Abba Weisskopf once. We were not members of Hizuk, but Arna was, and had been bat mitzvah there, and said, come to our cool downtown building for Shabbat. So I remember taking the bus down and having a parent pick us up, or vice versa, because we both lived in Mount Washington. And so we have to cross, it was shortly before Abba Weisskopf would have passed away. And at that point, the group around him that was davening on a Saturday morning was using the downstairs.
No, but that was after basically the main services had moved out.
I don't know. I think that on high holy days, things were upstairs. On holidays, things were upstairs. But again, without a double check with Arna, who was there more, and Judy Miller, who was, I guess, her mother and the second president of after Beth Am was founded. So she was involved in both congregations also. Was involved and alive at that point too. It's Ephraim we need to ask. Ephraim.
I mean, that in terms of personal development and so forth, when I was bar mitzvah, he was Adolf. And they had a celebration in his honor where all of his former bar mitzvah students were outfitted with wooden canes and large pins that said one of Adolf's boys. And he took a trip to Israel and he had left Adolf J and came back Abba Yosef.
What year was that?
After my bar mitzvah, which was 57.
57.
And the celebration with one of Adolf's boys would be sometime after that. So I don't know exactly. It would have been probably either late 50s or very early 60s.
Rabbi Koblenz was also paid off, right? Did he ever change it, or I don't know?
He was not here when I was here.
You know, I think Stanley Fine had a question.
Yeah, well, first, Michael Novey and I were classmates at City College and graduated this June 64 years ago. I think this is the first time I've seen Michael since then, so hello, Michael. Two comments. One, I think that when Chizik Muna operated on Utah Place during the high holidays, I believe that Dr. Lewis Kaplan conducted the services before the founding of Beth Am. And number two, Michael, when Chizik Muna went from Orthodox to conservative, was there a fall off of membership? And those who went to Orthodox synagogues, where would they likely have gone?
I don't know. I mean, the date was, what date did I mention? But it was.
I think 1948 or 47, you said they.
Yeah, well, I was not into synagogue politics at that point. And it was before my parents joined. Certainly there were some people that were unhappy enough to leave. I think some of the professionals, say teaching, would also have separated. So I can't imagine that something that was as wrenching as that would not have produced departures.
Yeah.
But I think the leadership perception, which was probably correct, was that they needed to be able to have the family seating in order to attract new people.
My sense would be that that Sheret Afillah, which is the synagogue up the road with the dome, actually where my parents belong. My father was a president of that in the 50s. They thrived in the 50s, and I would imagine that they got some of the fall off from Chizik Muna when it went from Orthodox to conservative.
Quite possibly. That's when I said that my grandfather was willing to be driven down here. He lived on Hilldale, just the other side of Park Circle, and would walk to Shari Zion. And so there also, I think, by that point, the locals in this neighborhood were fewer, and the traditional Jewish community at that point was at that point the other side of Park Circle.
We're gonna take another question from Sharon.
Yeah, this is so interesting, and I'm struck by how the synagogues can change while not changing location versus how they have to feel they have to change location or split. And this 20-year period of overlap, was that I mean, maybe you're too young, but was there a real anguish? Like, should we not, should we, everyone else is moving? What?
I was a kid, but I mean, I think that there was a combination of feeling a commitment, because remember, all the people who were here were members of Chis Comuna. And, the movement out was gradual. In other words, at first, there would be high holiday services, I think, at the Pikes Theater. And then when Chis Comuna began building, the first part that was built was the part basically behind the sanctuary. I mean, if you know where Chis Comuna, the way it is now, so it would be where the Stolman Auditorium is. And the reason for doing that first was that auditorium could serve as suburban high holiday seating. B, there were classrooms upstairs, so you could have a school there. And C, probably, I should have put this first, all of the building fundamentals are in the basement. The boiler and the heat and all of that stuff was in the basement underneath the Stolman. And so you had services moving no longer in the Pikes Theater, but now in the Chis Comuna's own building. But it was a number of years before they constructed the sanctuary itself, at which point the main services moved out. So there had been duality of services for probably the better part of a decade before then, with the ancillary services being in the county, and then it flipped, so the ancillary services were down here, but there were members in both places.
I'm gonna take, Zach, did you have a question? Oh,
There are
I'm
a
gonna
couple
take one
questions
more,
on the-
and then it's gonna come to the screen. I'm sorry.
There are a couple questions on the Zoom too, in the chat.
Yep, and coming back to that, we'll take one more in the room and then on the Zoom.
Yeah, I just wonder if there were differences down here compared to the main building or the new building? Like were there liturgical differences or philosophical differences, or did that different vibe? Like there was the DIY vibe that everyone talks about with Tom and Dr. Kaplan, but was there another vibe down here, that different one than the group that moved up there, or was it?
During that era, I was off in college.
Yeah,
So, I would.
very irresponsible of you not to be around the witness for us.
But so when I came back, I would be with my parents, it would be wherever the main services were.
Yeah,
My understanding is there was. And I used, Ephraim used to talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a different feel, different approach.
yeah,
And also Dr. Kaplan was really an iconoclast.
Right.
He wasn't, adherent to halacha in the same way as the conservative movement was. So he would if they were running long, he would skip Musa.
right.
Right, so I don't think that's the thing that would.
He didn't have staff, he didn't have professional staff down here either.
What I was gonna, oh, okay, sorry, hang on, I don't know your sister's name.
Joelle.
Joelle, is curious about how controversial the racial dynamics around the Jewish move to suburbs were at the time, and if the synagogues or rabbis felt any capacity to shape that story or simply had to follow along.
Again, you're talking about something that a person my age and not living in Baltimore didn't fully perceive. I mean, one thing that is relevant here is that there used to be as in many cities, the electric streetcar company built amusement parks at the end of the line, which had the beneficial event as far as the streetcar company was concerned of using the electricity when they didn't need it to run a whole flight of the streetcars.
Oh,
And giving people a reason to get on the streetcar to come to the end of the line
right.
to join the amusement park. And so there was an amusement park called Winnow Park
Mhm.
at the end of the streetcar line, along, Winnow Avenue. City College in those days had sort of a school dance every month. And the tradition was that you would have one of them would be at a ballroom there in Winnow Park, so that people would dance and then leave the dance floor and go and ride some of the rides. And my freshman year in high school, and I think I was at that dance, but I do not remember what happened. By then, Brown v. Board was in 1954. The Baltimore Public Schools integrated, I guess, by the fall of 55. So we're now talking about 3 years later. And we did have Black students at City. I think the student government vice president was Larry Gibson, who very active in local politics since then. And the Black students at the dance who expected to be able, people didn't think of those days, they expected to be able to do what the white students were doing, which is come dance and then leave the dance floor and go into the park. They were blocked because the park was whites only. So a few years later, there were major sit-ins at the park to try to get it to desegregate. Winnow Park. The amusement park. And Rabbi Goldman joined those. And there was a picture in the Sun of Rabbi Goldman looking very much like Rabbi Goldman, if you sort of can remember the way he would, just his expression and so forth, being fingerprinted.
Mhm.
And there certainly was a diversity of attitude within the congregation between those who had sort of a, well, it's about time reaction to it, those who were opposed to it, and those whose main question was, well, is this good for the Jews? And maybe it was, or maybe it wasn't. But and so you have a lot of racial dynamics in the city and in the Jewish community. I don't think, Joel, that there was any focus on, are we moving out in a way that is problematic for the community that we're leaving behind? That's a more subtle and a later kind of question.
We have time for two more questions. Andy Miller.
Thank you. And thanks, Michael and Sam, for this. It's great to see you. I'm sorry I couldn't make it down there this morning with the ice, but there's something that I wanted to highlight that was interesting to me because as Michael was reciting the history, Hizikamuna, as we know, was founded in 1871, and we know that it was founded in order to separate from, what eventually became Reform. But when we talk about the founding of Hizikamuna and how long it's been around, in the same breath, we talk about it being one of the founding synagogues of the conservative movement. Now, I could go back and look at Jan Schein's book to see what she says about this. I can't remember, which is why I'm asking this question now. You just pointed out that we didn't become part of the conservative movement until the 1940s. So if we're one of the founding synagogues of the conservative movement, and we always associate that with the age of the synagogue, whereas we didn't become conservative until much later. That seems to be sort of an interesting disjunct in the way we message about this, and I'm curious what you can say about that.
I think that what the conservative movement was and stood for, maybe, I'm not sure it was called conservative when when JTS and the United Synagogue were formed. And this is not an impression and not something that I am willing to stand behind, but I'm willing to toss out the speculation. I think that one of the bases for the founding of JTS was a bunch of wealthy, assimilated Jews whose ancestry came back, went back to the immigration in the 1830s and 1840s, who were seeking to produce a traditional, I'm not sure that Orthodox was a separate concept then, I mean, it was pre-Hertz and so forth, a traditional Jewish seminary and a traditional collection of congregations that would be the kind of place which halachically and mode of worship would have been attractive to the new Eastern European immigration, but also would be more decorous and more academically sophisticated than the rabbinic leadership that was coming with them. And so the founding of the JTS and the beginning of the United Synagogue were not, I guess to some extent, the mode would have, in those days, would have been on the right-wing side of conservadox. And that you had those two institutions evolve under the leadership of Sullivan Schechter and subsequent chancellors toward what conservative Judaism is today. But when Chesed Emunah was part of the founding, I don't think that it was a separate, non-traditional, or at least less traditional movement than Orthodoxy. So you had both a separation between the sort of traditional style of historic practice. And so one of the things about Chesed Emunah was that it was German. And therefore, in terms of acculturation and decorum, it was very consistent with the kind of traditional services and the kind of traditional organization that was in the mind of those who funded and founded JTS and the United Synagogue.
Yeah, my only observation is that you made the point, there's a point before which we were listed as Orthodox in the phone book and after which conservative, and that's much later than I guessed. That's all. Thank you very much for that answer.
Well, I mean, what had happened was that the mixed seating had sort of become a definitive breaking point. That the fact that you would have a very limited number of individual mishaberachs, a lot of people missed them, but that wasn't a point of departure from Orthodoxy. And somehow that the separate seating. Let me know, my ring, the separate seating had come to be, a cathected distinction. In the same way that today, a separate seating and a mechitza are separate. That I think, but for the fact that Rabbi Rosenblatt, that's the fellow, gave a tshuva that a microphone and loudspeaker was okay on Shabbat as long as you didn't do anything with it. I think that might have also been, but for the fact that you did have congregations that were not abstaining from using a loudspeaker. That the Jan's book says that when it was in 1940, when Blizzard decided to enhance the acoustics upstairs and get a loudspeaker, in addition to the opinion from Rabbi Koblitz, he had consulted with Rabbi Rosenblatt, who had done so much, who had done extensive study before he said that fellow could do it.
I'm gonna jump to another question.
Sure.
The last question from David Saunders. Could you talk a little bit about the dynamic between the German and Eastern European Jews? In 120 seconds. I mean, that's you were kind of referring to it a little bit earlier. Yeah, I'm sorry.
What?
You still doing it?
Yeah, and then I got a call.
No, I think that
I'm going for a walk with Gil.
the distinction was, I think, more intense in terms of,
Okay,
in terms of social and country clubs than it was big congregations.
oh, okay.
Dr. Fine's history of Jewish Baltimore goes up through the point when, under the leadership of Lox Learn, who I think he was related to the Zolds, the two separate community charities merged, which is I think about 1920, because up until then you had a German communal charity and a Eastern European communal charity, and Levin, after whom Levendale was named, was instrumental in bringing the two charities together. There's at least one reference where at one meeting, he raised that possibility when both the leaders of the two charities were in the same room, and each formally rejected it. And he then said, "Gentlemen, I'm glad to see there's at least one thing that we all agree on." I mean, if you have not read, don't give me credit for any of the things that I put in here, because they're all the interesting stuff is cribbed from Dr. Fine's book. And it was published by the JPS, and I can't imagine that it isn't still available with the Jewish Maryland Historical Society.
Okay, we are going to wrap. Thank you.